Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mayor Bailey.
Here.
Mr. Bateman.
Here.
Mr. Blair.
Yes, here.
Hart.
Here.
Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps.
Here.
Mr. Ping.
Here.
Welcome, everyone. With us tonight, we have our Director of Finance, Mark Medler, Assistant City Manager, Corey Wright, Clerk of Council, Misty Clark, City Manager, Dave Kennedy, City Solicitor, Joe Braun, and Chief of Police, Michael Gabrielson. Also, former council members, Pat Mays and Todd Osborne. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here. First, we have open forum. Nobody signed up to speak. So next is review and approval of minutes. There were some presentations. Those got moved, in case you're wondering.
Oh, okay. I was wondering.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry. All right. So next we have review and approval of minutes from the March 28th, 2023 meeting. Are there any additions or changes to those? We have motion to approve as written.
Motion to approve the March 28th, 2023 council.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Ori. Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bateman.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mr. Hart.
Yes.
Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps.
Yes.
Mr. Ping.
Yes.
Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right, next we have a public hearing for the East Loveland Avenue Bridge easement, and we did discuss this last meeting. Can we have a motion to open the public hearing?
I'll move to open the hearing on the East Loveland Avenue Bridge easement.
Second.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mr. Hart.
Yes.
Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps.
Yes.
Mr. Ping.
Yes.
Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Bateman.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
And no one signed up to speak. Can we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Hart.
Yes.
Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps.
Yes.
Mr. Ping.
Yes.
Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Bateman.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right. Next, we have a public hearing on the Oak Street Development Zoning Map and Text Amendment. We have not talked about this one before, but it is on the agenda a little later on, along with the memo, so we'll wait to discuss it until then, but we will open and close the public hearing now. So would someone make a motion to open the public hearing?
I move we open the public hearing, case number 2022-04, SPD number 19, Oak Street Development Zoning Map and Text Amendment.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps.
Yes.
Mr. Ping.
Yes.
Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Bateman.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mr. Hart.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right. And no one signed up that meant to for the public hearing. So can we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close the public hearing, case number 2022-04, SPD number 19, Oak Street Development Zoning Map and Text Amendment.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Phelps.
Yes.
Mr. Ping.
Yes.
Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Bateman.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mr. Hart.
Yes.
Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right. Can you have a second reading of, why don't you read the first ordinance?
Ordinance assessing sewer main extension costs associated with Section 2 of the Chimney Ridge subdivision located in Warren County, Ohio.
And this was discussed by Mr. Wright last meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this matter? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Ping.
Yes.
Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Bateman.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mr. Hart. Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps.
Yes.
Ordinance 41 is adopted by a vote of 7-0.
All right. Can you read the next ordinance, please?
Ordinance authorizing the city manager to grant a permanent easement to the Board of Commissioners of Claremont County related to the reconstruction of the East Loveland Avenue Bridge.
All right. And this was discussed last time by Mr. Braun. Are there any further questions or comments? Mr. Bateman?
I'll just comment that I'm going to abstain due to my residence being on East Loveland.
Okay. Any other comments? Call the roll.
Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Bateman.
Abstain.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Mr. Hart.
Yes.
Mr. Ori.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps. Mr. Ping.
Yes.
Ordinance 42 is adopted by a vote of 7-0.
Mr. Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. The first item we have this evening is a resolution for the city council to authorize the award of the West Loveland Avenue Bridge Congestion Mitigation Study to Burgess and Nyepel. So going back more than a year, and it seems like time flies now. One of the first meetings that I had was an opportunity to sit with ODOT and Kennedy and the mayor to kind of start talking about this. And this has been a long-standing council goal: be a regional leader regarding a new river crossing. And so with that, we set about the task of meeting with communities, various stakeholders, our adjoining neighbors and all that, and sort of got the friendly nod. Yes, it seems like a good idea, but you're going to have to run with it. And so consistent with that, the city is leading that charge. And throughout the last year, we've been updating the public and advertising that through various our work on that, kind of understanding what we need to do to get this done. And part of that is this is a multi-year transportation planning initiative, and it's required to be like in that manner, to be conducted in that manner, because you need to preserve access to federal funding for a project of this magnitude. And so the state and federal transportation processes mandate that we follow this. And Mr. Phelps and his engagement at OKI, and we heard from Mr. Kaler last year, that's critical to funding these large projects. So with that, the city worked at the end of last year to put together basically a request for qualifications, is what I'll call it, seeking letters of interest from consultants interested in conducting the bridge study with the guidance of ODOT. And ODOT staff were incredibly helpful through that process in getting us to a finished publication on that. And we got several firms, and among them, part of that quality-based selection process is that you have to review and rank each of the firms. And so, consistent in all of the ranking, Burgess and Nyepel came in number one. They have experience with the city. As you know, they're working with the city on the East Loveland project here. They have a couple of sub-consultants that the city has used. In fact, TEC Engineering is in that, and they are doing counts and things for the turn lane project for us. They did the design for that, which will be going out to bid. Actually, I think it advertised today. And so with that, we have a host of qualified sub-consultants. We have a qualified team of consultants. And Mr. Smith, Steve Smith, is here this evening to answer technical questions, because it's a pretty detailed scope of work to get to from zero to a final feasibility study and a preferred alternative. And that is really what you're going for. And there's really 4 parts of that work program. So with the quality-based selection process, you can't advertise with fees being part of that. You have to choose based on the qualifications, and then you negotiate a scope. So we began the process after ranking and announcing that, of negotiating the scope, and they brought to us a proposal. Now, the full proposal to complete the whole project is around $264. It's a little under $264,000. I think it's $263. It's in the memo off the top of my head. But the work program starting in April really lends itself to spreading this over 2 budgetary cycles, because we will be basically we have to get a purpose and need statement, which is you got to get that to pass go, and then we have to get a draft feasibility study, and that could be completed hopefully by the end of the year, which will then allow us to, City Council would need to appropriate the additional funding to complete the study, ultimately with public involvement in a final feasibility study. Public involvement feeds that, and that's where you go out, you do the open houses and those kind of things. Now, there will be some public involvement before that with stakeholder engagement to kind of get buy-in from the folks that we've introduced this to. But in that regard, really what you're driving at is basically a final feasibility study and a preferred alternative or group of alternatives that the city can advance to preliminary design. And that is really then, and one of the benefits of having Burgess and Nyepel engaged is they have a track record with large and complex projects. Interchange modifications, they're involved with, I believe, the North Hamilton, you guys involved with North Hamilton's crossing. Yes, which is really a transformative project for the city of Hamilton, and advancing those successfully through design and to implementation. And, this is really the first step. Once you get to that preliminary design and you preserve that access to federal funds, the federal funding process allows for right-of-way acquisition, design, preliminary final design, construction. I mean, it's really turnkey in that. And that's, in my work with OKI, with Mr. Phelps' involvement with OKI, that is a critical part of that. Those projects are scored and ranked, and depending on the size of that, they may be scored and ranked by higher agencies other than the Metro Planning Agency. So in that, respectfully request City Council adopt this resolution. This is an exciting and transformative project for the city. We all know we have a problem. This is our way to fix it. And we can't, but if you don't know where you're going, any direction will take you there. And that's the whole point of this study. So,
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Mr. Hart?
I have two questions. One, could you, at the end of the $264,000, I heard what you said, and I read the packet, and it's very nicely laid out. But at the end of 264, we get to a place where we have a solution that we then need to go and design it, right?
correct.
So 264 just gets us the idea.
That gets you to the point where you can enter preliminary design.
Sure. Okay.
I'm sorry, where you can what?
Enter preliminary design.
My second question is, have any of our adjacent municipalities offered to chip in?
That's a good question. And as I alluded to briefly, we received generally positive reception from Hamilton County TID, Claremont County TID, and the engineer's office because they wear dual hats. Miami Township, generally positive reception. Hamilton Township, generally positive reception. But Warren County, they kind of nodded. And basically, when you ask about funding, you're on your own. And so
the genesis of much of our traffic problem, which is outside of the city of Loveland,
mm-hmm.
Our adjacent municipalities, not to throw stones, but who help create the problem, aren't willing to help us solve the problem.
Yet.
Okay. I like where your mind's at, Mr.
Yep.
Are you,
I'm done. Please.
Mr. Blair?
I think if Loveland wants to become I want to go there destination, instead of the have to go through their pain in the neck that it is now, a bridge is the way to do it. And whichever location the bridge ends up being in, Loveland will be the greatest beneficiary because of the relief to our traffic. It's a stake in the ground, and it's an expensive stake, but somebody's got to do it. If not us, who? And if not now, when? As I said, a new bridge, I believe, will be transformative for the city. And it's been said that wise men plant trees under the shade of which they'll never get to sit. And I think there are kids in kindergarten in Loveland right now who may be among the first to drive across that bridge, wherever it is. And it benefits us the most by leading the charge. I think we have the most money in the game. We certainly have the first money in the game, and I think it will ultimately compel others to join us out of their own self-interest.
Yeah, I didn't mean to insinuate that I was against spending the money. I am 100% in favor of putting that stake in the ground that you mentioned.
Mr. Ori?
I had a similar question with regards to other municipalities pitching in, but my question is we've talked about a couple locations. There could be 3 or 4 different locations. Or if we put a bridge in Loveland, obviously Loveland's going to absorb most of the cost. If we put a bridge somewhere outside of Loveland, how does that get controlled then?
So, and Mr. Smith, can speak if that pleases council about, regional solutions to that. But him and I have had a number of conversations about how this is a regional this is a regional problem that demands a regional solution. So with that, given the location of the bridge crossings that are, north of the city and south of the city now, there is a likelihood that at least one of the bridgeheads will land outside of city limits. I mean, if you just look at pure river miles and where they're located. But part of that is when you bring those funding sources together and you make that compelling case for, once we have the solution, we have to study a host of alternatives. We have to study a no build. We have to study a couple of different, strategic, changes and all that. And we have to study a couple of crossing locations. But I think that the study is inevitably going to yield, not to poison the study or anything else, because the process is the process. But I think it's going to inevitably yield that the new river crossing is the only viable solution to truly address the long-term longevity of that and the regional solution. And I think, to Mr. Blair's point about, the word yet, I think we're going to make the compelling case for the benefits of this to our adjoining communities, because it's going to be untenable for them to say thanks but no thanks, because the solution is so attractive in that, assuming we can get to that point. So,
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Bateman?
I just have a couple of questions, and I'll try to keep them brief. So, one thing I noticed is that, and Mr. Wright, you alluded to sort of placing your chips on the table as to what you think that this might yield. I see on here the alternative one, no build. Is that the kind of thing that would we see that coming while we're going down the road of all of these stages of the study? That if for some reason the answer is, oh, this is a unsolvable issue, I think that's one thing that sort of worries me a little bit, is what if we spend all this money and it comes back to say, nope, there's really nothing within the realm of possibility that you guys can do to address this.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. I know that having lived through Eastern Corridor in various phases and iterations, and in talking with Keith Smith with ODOT and the others with ODOT, these planning processes, they are expensive, but they're required because you have to vet that no build. I mean, obviously, I think given regional growth, I think that the no build, the planning level traffic will indicate, and again, I'm not a traffic engineer, that's why we would be hiring one, and several actually. But at the end of the day, I think if you look at the regional growth, it's only, I mean, I think there's hundreds of units that are on the shelf in Goshen Township right now that are going to come on. And Miami Township continues to add units, and growth in Hamilton Township continues. And so all of those, whether we like it or not, all roads lead to downtown. And the physical environment here is such, the built environment is such, that I think the studies will bear out that there are very limited solutions that we can do in that, confined approach, that it's going to drive that you're going to have to do a crossing or a crossing in some other combination of ITS or roundabout strategic intersection improvements, kind of looking at a network. And part of the study area when we met with Mr. Smith and his project team was about setting up gates, traffic counting gates in these, and where we should look at those things. I mean, and they're listed in there. We're going to look at all the choke points feeding into that: 48, Loveland, Miamiville, East Loveland, Butterworth at 48. We're going to look at the bridge. We're going to go up to Rich Road. We're going to go down Loveland, Madera. We're going to look at all of those things to see where that traffic's going. And one of the nice things, and we looked at it very preliminarily with ODOT, is the street light data, just to get an idea. On an off day, they're saying 10,000 plus cars a day over that bridge. And the reality is it's probably higher. And we don't know what that, and the other thing the study can tell us is kind of look at where that traffic's coming, going, and all of those things, and understand what's local, what's regional. That's why you do this. Because it may say, 60% of your traffic's local, or it may say that 75% of it's regional. But the study will bear that out, and it will strategically identify if a crossing is to be advanced and it's feasible And again, we know with State and Wild Scenic River and all that, this is a tall mountain to climb. There's no question. But, this is what it takes to even find out if we can do it.
That is it's a good segue for my second question, which is really around, these studies and development plans that we put forward in the past. There's always a aspirational component and aspirational quality to these. So my question is really just around, is this feasibility study going to hone in on the things that are not necessarily wave a magic wand and this could be true if certain parameters were, if certain conditions were met, as opposed to, no, we're going to try to provide a proposal that is feasible within your own control, within what the city of Loveland has an opportunity to do for its residents, as opposed to saying, hey, if these, and then the last thing I'll just tag onto this is, so in that process, which we're going through, do you envision that the touch points that come up throughout this year and then the second year, that stakeholders that would be involved outside of our control might gain interest or sort of drum up awareness of this proposal throughout the process?
So the answer, I'll answer the second part of your question first. The answer is yes, that will happen. And we will have a multitude of interests. Some will be positive and some will be negative that try to shape the outcome of that study. And that will occur. And we saw that in Eastern Corridor, in our, as a funding partner with the Claremont County TID and advancing that, you had multiple entities that were for it until they weren't. And then you had multiple entities that were on the fence and then were 100% for it. And so, and that process took, I think I was probably in high school when they started talking about it. And in 2013, we, cut the ribbon over the first overpass part of it. And we didn't do a lot except contribute funding and attend meetings, provide stakeholder input, and host public involvement. But at the end of the day, I think that, that you're going to get a lot of positive, actors. I think that you're going to get a lot of positive reception generally in the community for that. But you're also going to get people who have particular interests that want to protect those at all costs. And you're going to get a lot of people that are in between, and they're going to see what the study bears out. And I think that's why the feds and the state require this extensive planning process, is so that when you get to that, you end up with they call it a preferred alternative, because you've eliminated everything else, or a group of alternatives that you've eliminated everything else. We can, if you go into wherever, you'll get 20 different, and there's 50 people in there, you'll get 50 different opinions on how to fix the problem. This study flushes all that out and drives you to a quantifiable solution that here it is, and it's vetted, and then you go forward. So.
Okay, my last question, and thank you for your explanations. It's really appreciated. Just around the reporting process during this, could you talk a little bit about how often we might receive updates and what that sort of cadence would be as it relates to the first two stages?
Well, I think that, we have the councilmatic reports that we can certainly utilize that and provide council periodic updates on that. And I think as we get to the point where we have a draft purpose and need study, we could bring in the purpose and need statement and say, here's where we are. The planning study has said, here is your purpose and need statement. This is what we're going to advance. And as part of that, we have, frequent communications to council as part of that. And then as you engage in the draft feasibility study, there's going to be specific deliverables that we can certainly update council on, whether it's through a staff report or just an informal exchange in a meeting or whatnot. And again, I think we're going to continue to use our social media and our newsletter and other vehicles that we have. We have a very robust communication, infrastructure here that we can tap into. So I think those are all positive things working in our favor.
Okay.
And if I could just add, because Corey and I were talking about this, I think we're going to try to do a better job on some of the larger projects to bring in some of the players along the way. So at your next meeting, Choice One's going to be here to sort of show how the Loveland Madeira Road corridor has transformed from a comprehensive plan to a workable document. Speaking to everyone involved with the fire station, we expect that sometime in June. Chief Huber and the whole team will come in and do a presentation to council regarding how the new station is going to look, how it's going to fit in. So I would think as part of Councilmatic, under council goals, Corey can bring in some of the players, bring Burgess Snipel back when we're at key locations. I think we don't do that enough, and I think that's sort of our goal. 15 minutes in front of a meeting will really bring you up to the scope on the fact that, for example, the city's comprehensive plan isn't sitting on a shelf; it's working, and that Burgess Snipel's. So that is something I think we're as a team going to try to bring more to you, using the display and using the brain of the people that we're paying. So I think that'll play in. We'll try to make that a big part of each of the quarterly council goal inputs, not the one that's next council meeting, but the future ones.
I know that in past involvement with the Claremont County TID, the consultants would come and give updates periodically on where they were on milestones and whatnot. And those were very productive for everybody that was, whether they were intimately involved or whether they were on the periphery, just to kind of keep tabs on that. And so that things are advancing. I think that's a great idea. The more you talk about it, the better it is.
Agreed. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes. Mr. King?
A couple questions on the fee estimate. There's language in here that talks about this being a fee estimate. Just to clarify, this is a fixed fee that we're talking about here, right? It's not something where we're going to potentially be looking at adjustments coming down the pike.
So when they provide these proposals, and I asked Mr. Smith that, they basically provide what they believe their maximum hourly commitment is, and they total all those up, and that's how they generate that. To be clear, council is appropriating in this action only 198,000 whatever, and when we get to that, we stop. And wherever we are, we stop. But
so at that point, we could be 3/4 of the way through the project, and then we have to do another 25% of that money, or else we just don't get.
You have a draft feasibility study. Yes, that's it. Yeah. So you would appropriate in the second. I mean, the goal here would be to spread this and to advance the full study. I mean, because if you do a draft feasibility study, literally it will just sit on the shelf because you haven't done the public involvement or any of that. So
right, but I guess the question or the point I'm getting at is part of this we're talking about putting off till next year. If this is not a fixed fee to provide a feasibility or to provide the whole thing completed, then next year there could be inflationary costs that raise the price. This year we've only allowed $200,000 in round numbers. If the project isn't finished, then we have to come up with more money, or else we don't have it.
We would hold them to the fixed. We would hold them to the schedule they've provided.
So this is a fixed fee then to get the product.
I mean, this is maximum fee.
Okay. All right. As far as the location goes, the traffic studies and everything that are mentioned are fairly central to Loveland. There have been, over the years, people have talked about everything all the way from Foster down to what I still call the Blue Bridge over on near 275. So in between that range, does this study include looking at that length of section, or is it just focused primarily in Loveland and Loveland very near?
Well, so it's sort of both. So if you look at the gates that were outlined in the proposal, I call them gates. Those are the traffic counting gates. We're going to catch. We're obviously not going to go down to 275 in Ward's Corner. We're going to catch everybody that's going to be feeding into the funnel. So we're going to catch 48. We're going to catch. So really, what you're driving at is you're trying to identify a solution to a specific problem. And so you're grabbing that traffic that's not. We don't care about who's accessing 275 from Miami Township. What we care about are people who are bypassing 275 through Loveland to go somewhere else. And so we strategically identified those gates that go all the way down Loveland Madeira. So you're going to capture that traffic, those counts coming to and from and throughout, which is why we didn't go up to West Loveland, because you can circumvent the entire downtown if you're on West Loveland and you go that way. So what you really want to do is you want to catch all edges of the funnel to then identify how best to circumvent the funnel in the future.
Well, and what what I'm thinking, I guess, is kind of goes back to Mr. Hart's comment earlier. If the solution is a bridge in Loveland, then it primarily is going to be a Loveland problem. If we find that there is a solution that is north in Hamilton Township or something like that, then it becomes more of a regional problem. And so, yes, we benefit, and maybe we are involved in paying for that bridge to help alleviate traffic here. But there is an attractiveness in a way to a bypass of sorts, as opposed to just another route through downtown Loveland.
Correct.
And so that's what I'm getting at, I guess, is this study comprehensive enough that it will look at an alternative that is a mile outside of Loveland, but is not necessarily right in our central area. I understand the traffic flow, but how far out are we going to look for the bridge location?
We actually, in our scope, we indicated that they have to study at least 4 alternatives. One would be a bridge crossing north of downtown, and one would be a bridge crossing south of downtown. And if you look at the river mile spacing on that, the reality, and then existing network connections and proposed network connections, and where those crossings might be feasible, just on a scope, just on a 30,000 foot scope, that's going to drive, as I indicated, at least one of those bridge footholds is probably going to be outside the city limits.
Right, but maybe not far outside.
It might be a mile, it might be 2 miles. River geology, crossings, all the topography, all of those things are going to drive it. So,
last question is: does the feasibility study include any sense of a magnitude of cost? Not a bid or not an accurate number, but just at this location, which is the best location we can find, we're in the order of $20 million, $10 million, $100 million, so that we have some sense of how big the cost is.
I mean, we're going to have some idea on the cost. Yep. You're not going to have the inflationary factor of when you get the funding and all that.
Right. No, and I'm looking more from a standpoint of just one of the questions that always comes up when I talk with residents about a bridge. At some point, we discuss, this is not something that is a tiny little project. This is going to be a ton of money. And so having a sense of that helps to move the conversation. All right. Thank you.
Right. You want to say?
Yeah, and I think Kathy wanted to add that part of what Corey's creating here is sort of the boilerplate of the map towards being eligible for a myriad of funding. And both Corey and Vice Mayor Phelps are very engaged with OKI funding. And that's when the regional partners really need to show up. It was pretty clear we weren't going to get much cash from anyone along the way. No. But at that point in time, when OKI looks at it from a beneficiary standpoint and the total population that'll benefit much more than just Loveland, then this thing is very fundable. It's like bike trail funding. Back in the old days when people were chasing all the rails to trails money, it was plethora. But no one funds anything without a plan. Or without a maybe, but it could be, and this is the first.
It's going to require. I mean, a project of that magnitude is going to require access to federal funding. I don't think anybody anticipates the city's just going to write a blank check.
No, I understand that, but it still is important in the discussion with our residents for them to understand that when they're complaining that they're not getting heard and we're not doing anything, there's a big difference between them thinking this is a $1 million project and it actually being 30 million or something like that. I mean, the steps that are required are a number of things, and that's more the message that I want to make sure we're getting back to is just how big the problem is, so to speak. I think we all have a general sense of it, but that is not necessarily well understood.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments?
I would just throw in that through my experience there as being the representative to ODOT, these projects, especially bridges, they're going to be expensive, and that's most bridges aren't built by cities; they're built by counties, states, and federal money being involved, and so it's a beauty contest to get that money. And I remember Mr. Kohler telling me at ODOT that you've got to have skin in the game. And this is what we're about to do, is get some serious skin in the game to come up with this study. And I'm pleased to see the work that's gone in and to this and arriving at this point, because we do need a quality consultant to get into this and give us what we're looking for in terms of a comprehensive report. And that has what's really important when you talk to the influences on the ultimate decision makers on projects like these. The quality of the consultant, the reputation, and the credibility is huge, and experience. So I'm pleased that we're following that route, and I think we're going to position ourselves. Ultimately, the arc of time for projects like this is pretty long, but ultimately, I think this will be money well spent.
Thank you. Anything further? Go ahead and read the resolution, please.
Resolution awarding the contract to complete the West Loveland Avenue Bridge congestion mitigation study to Burgess and Nybel, Inc.
Does anybody have a comment on the resolution? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
Mr. Ori?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps?
Yes.
Mr. Ping?
Yes.
Mayor Bailey?
Yes.
Resolution 43 is adopted by a vote of 7-0.
Mr. Wright?
Thank you. So we have the next item moving into ordinances. This is the Oak Street formal zoning map and text amendment. So this ordinance requires 2 readings to actually formally amend the map. If you recall, council adopted the concept plan, written findings of fact, development guidelines, and all of that. I think it was in August of 2022, and now we're at that next stage. And I'll be brief because we've talked about this a lot. The proposal has not changed in any regard from when council approved it last year as part of the first step of the 2-step SPD process. So the applicant has provided all the required information. All of that information has been included in the packet for council. If this ordinance is adopted, this would formally amend the map. And I would just have one other note, and I did address this in the memo. The applicant is actively working through the other phase of that, which is the HPPC review, which is ongoing at this time. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And the action required would be to adopt the proposed legislation, and that as recommended for adoption by the Planning Commission. So,
did you want to introduce the individuals that are?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. So I have a couple members of the development team here. Chris and Rod. Yes, Chris and Rod. So.
All right. Thanks for being here. All right. Does anybody have any questions, comments for Corey or Chris or Rob?
Do you guys have anything you'd like to contribute?
If you do, if you could speak from the podium, please. There are people watching from home, at least a couple.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask.
What kind of?
Yeah, do that. Please.
Rod Sabo, actually engineer who helped develop the plan, had a medical emergency and couldn't be here, so we're kind of pinch hitting. But that's been a long process. I think we've taken a lot of input from council and others, and we're thankful for the support that we have for the project.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Mr. Ori.
Mr. Sabo, I just wanted to say thanks for being persistent in this. I know we went from 64 units, I think, the first step down to these 6.
Mm-hmm.
It was a long process, but you got a good product here. It looks good.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Hart?
I just comment briefly. It's keeping with my previous stance. The project, as it stands, is beautiful. The houses that you're planning to put on there are beautiful, and quite frankly, I hope one day to be proven wrong about this. But as it stands right now, and where I came from the comprehensive master position, I feel like the density created with this project is not something that the city necessarily has demonstrated a need for. And again, I hope moving down the road, this is just I'm dead wrong, and this turns out to be a beautiful project, and everybody's super happy with it, and everybody can come back and wave a finger in my face. But creating more density on current lots and changing zoning to do so. I'm really hesitant to do that, and for that reason, and that reason alone, I can't support this.
Thank you. Any further comment? No, I think it's a nice project. I think having these type of units within walking distance of downtown is a plus for us. So I appreciate your efforts to listen and to bring back a project that seems to have much more support than the original project.
Yep.
So, and thank you for being here to answer
All right.
questions tonight. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, you want to go ahead and read the ordinance as a first reading only?
Ordinance amending the codified ordinances and zoning map of the city of Loveland, Ohio, to change the zoning district classification of certain property located jointly within the historic zoning district and the residential medium district zoning district to the special planning district zoning district classification for special planning district 19 Oak Street development.
All right, thank you. You won't hurt our feelings if you leave, really. You don't have to stay for the rest.
You're certainly
We always say that, and we really are fine with it. We will understand.
Point of order.
Yes, sir.
Do we need to set this for a public
I
hearing?
think we just did it.
We just did that.
Yeah,
We
that's,
did.
that's one we just did.
What date?
Just did it. We did the public hearing at
Today.
the beginning of this
So
week.
that was the thing we did earlier?
We opened and
But no one
closed it
signed
so
up.
quick.
No one signed up to speak. Yeah, we took care of that.
You're right. Got it. It just didn't have the date on it. I got it.
Okay. Mr. Wright, are you this next one? The flood damage.
Yes, ma'am. So this is the flood damage prevention regulations. From time to time, FEMA revises their firm maps and conducts a flood insurance, study and all that. And they have pushed out an update for the Little Miami watershed. And we are now subject to, let me change the camera angle, I'm sorry. We are now subject to being required to adopt model regulations that they publish as part of this update. So really, and not to belabor the point too much, we really don't have any choice in this if we want to continue our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. And so with this, we're kind of following the similar approach to what we did with the easement for the East Loveland Bridge, is to introduce the resolution, then schedule the public hearing, which would be recommended for April 25th, in order to keep time with FEMA's required adoption of that before June 7th. So with our process, you have to have both readings and then the 30-day effective date. We do recommend a public hearing, sort of a belt and suspenders approach, because it is land use. And we would have that public hearing. We can give them proof that we advertised it. We give them a copy if the legislation is adopted of the ordinance of all of that. That's all required as part of this process. So with that, would recommend the council adopt the ordinance as presented. And I would note ODNR, which provides state level coordination, has been absolutely fabulous, and Ms. Klopfenstein has done a great job getting us to this point. And both Cindy and ODNR deserve recognition, because I know our floodplain rep at ODNR spent a lot of time looking at our ordinance, taking the model, and then formatting it to fit our current regulations. So, and I actually received word from her today that she gave us the thumbs up. So,
And I just want to add, she's a certified CFM. She's a certified floodplain manager, and it is an arduous task. You can imagine where I spent my 25 years. Everything happened. It was in the floodplain. So Corey and Cindy really dove into this, into these regulations. It's one of those things where Corey and I were talking about. There's so little input, there's so little modification. It really made no sense to take it to other committees, and because you're held hostage to them. So, but Cindy's interpretation of it is excellent. She does a wonderful job with that. Mm-hmm. And Corey spent hours reformatting the document so it fit into our numbers. So, but if you look at the map, you'll see that it does actually create a little bit of a positive fiscal impact for the city, because as you can imagine, we're in the floodplain here, and any reduction in that level will actually reduce our flood costs for this building, which are fairly significant. So we don't really spike in the football on that, but that is an end result of any time there's a reduction in the level. So
So the plan is to have 2 readings, but we're going to pass it as an emergency on the next reading.
And that way it's effective. It's
Effective immediately.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Corey on the memo? All right. Well, we do need to have a motion for a public hearing to set one for April 25th, correct? Someone care to make that motion?
I'll move for an April 25th public hearing at or about 7 p.m. for the amendments to Chapter 1313, flood damage prevention.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
Mr. Ori?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps?
Yes.
Mr. Ping?
Yes.
Mayor Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and do the first reading of the ordinance?
Ordinance amending Chapter 1313 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Loveland, Ohio, entitled Flood Damage Prevention Regulations.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
So this memorandum is basically broken into 2 parts. The first part is both related to Chapter 1307 of the city's codified codes, codified ordinances regarding impact fees. The first one is just part of it is just simply to give you sort of a background and what the trend is in relation to impact fees for the city. We do 3 impact fees. We do a water impact fee, a road impact fee, and a recreation impact fee. For this point of discussion, it's really not so much about the water impact fee. Water impact fees are a little less of a gray area. It's more of a commodity. They're paying for a set commodity. It's based upon a meter size. Remember when impact fees first came out back in the 90s, it was quite a hoo-ha. There were multiple court decisions on it. So we have the 2 main ones that we have are the road and rec fees, which are based on $500 per unit. So a new single family home, it's $1,000. That's $500 for road, $500 for rec. Since 2014, we've been averaging about $73,000 for water impact fees and around $23,000 for road and rec each. Though it should be noted that in the last 3 years, road and rec has dropped to $8,000, $225,000 each average. And what we're seeing here is that obviously there's a slowing in residential development, and most of our commercial and industrial development is largely outside of Chestnut, will largely be redevelopments of existing sites. We don't have a lot of new commercial structures that will be coming in. There's only 1 vacant lot left inside the Commerce Park. So we see what the trend is, and I think this city council, and I think Councilman Hart talked on it, but I believe that the Grail property and the Grail development was a message from the residents regarding density and the fact that they don't want high density projects. So I think city council listened to that, and part of that is that the days of the 1990s when this city probably had, Todd can jump in, but I would have to say there was times you were permitting 40 homes a year without blinking an eye. Those days are over, but then on the same hand, the needs aren't over. If anything, the needs are greater and the costs are greater, both from a road and a rec standpoint. So expenses, we average $569,000 in park op fees alone. We average $653,000 just in our road programs in 2014. That's $110 per household for operation of our parks, $127,000 for the road. But let's be honest, our road program has gone up so much that we're now at $223 a home, a household, just for our road program, and that's pretty important. And when you look at our parks and the needs of our parks, 21, 22, and 23 alone, we spent $490,000 on park capital projects. You can remember those, a lot of money in McCoy, a lot of money in Nisbet, so on and so forth. Now we've gotten $331,000 in grants over the last 10 projects in that same time frame. But you have to remember, park projects are very competitive and they're traditionally very, very small. So those 10 projects at 331, we've averaged about $33,000 per project. take out the 75,000 we just received for the heights, and that's even lower. So, and of course, all of these require local matches. Looking ahead, Nisbet, the price tag to do Nisbet completely is $3 million. There's been a definite call from our residents for more pickleball courts. We have a very, very preliminary design for 4 courts to be added to Kiwanis Park. That's $300,000. That's clearly a something that both our current and future residents are going to be needing. And then, meanwhile, what else have you done? You're almost finished with replacing all your play sets. We're underway now where we're working year by year, redoing all of our restrooms. Pickleball courts, parking lots all need to be resurfaced on the same schedule as your roads. Again, on your road program, don't forget that road programs often are a part of many other projects, right? Road dollars don't just go to your road program. Just recently, they were a big part of the Main Street water replacement project. They're a big part of the Miami View cul-de-sac project, and of course Broadway, and of course road dollars will be going towards East Loveland Bridge, and of course the Harrison project. So our road dollars, when you look at the total per household, are pretty extensive. And the general fund, no, the MVR, the motor vehicle registrations, and the gas tax contribute to our road program. But in 2022, the city put $813,000 general fund dollars into our road program, and in 2023 we're estimated at $750. So what does all this mean? I think the message is pretty clear. We asked our residents through the WMR fee to pay $7.50 per unit to help us fix our water lines. That's pretty clear. It's out there, it's being paid, and it's strictly was on our residents. So I think the theory is, as in the same light, we need our developers to pay what is a proportionate. That's the catchword with impact fees, that it must be proportionate. So just as Tom Carroll and Jeff Wright did back in 2008, they developed a methodology. They brought in a consultant to help them with the methodology, because you can't just say, I think an impact fee should be this. It just can't be, or you'll get challenged and you'll likely lose. So what we're saying here is, myself, Corey, Cindy, and Mark will begin over the course of the summer, and we'll be back at the end of the summer and bring you a methodology for increased road and rec impact fees. They will largely, what I'm seeing the trend is, a lot of people are leaning towards per household. It's a little bit more indicative of what the impact would be. I believe that we may be bringing a police facility impact fee to you. What is that? That is very common, especially for a community that runs a police department not on a police levy. Straight general fund runs our police department. So a police facility fee is a fee that goes into a pot, and that pot is used for new cruisers or improvements into the facility. It's never used for salary. It's used for facilities or major equipment such as cruisers. Just think, if we had a regular fund to pay for cruisers, you all just purchased 2 new, as you recall. So that is the first part of the memo, which is just where we're at, what we plan on doing, what we plan on bringing back to you, how it can proportionately be changed to what is now the current state of the city in terms of residential, commercial, and industrial development. And I didn't mention that it's in the memo, but commercial and industrial development pays 0.5% of the value of their structures for all new buildings and additions. So obviously that's going to be very unlikely in the future. What is in front of you is some modifications to 1307. As I said, impact fees are not shaped by the Ohio Revised Code. They're shaped by a myriad of challenges and Ohio court decisions, Supreme Court decisions. That's what is the trend. And with all honesty, our 1307 doesn't meet the litmus test. We need to fix that part of it. So what is presented to you are some modifications to Chapter 1307 that I feel are pretty right on with what meets the minimum requirements for the city to charge impact fees. Because one of the things that was consistent through the court decisions is a city, due to its home rule, can do impact fees. That's the victory. That's the mesh in it. and it must be a proportionate charge. So, but what I think we needed added purpose and intent, and we needed a section that talks about the use and the appropriation of those fees, and those were both added. And so, under road and rec, so you have whole new sections that we added that discusses the purpose and intent, and then we added the use and the appropriation, and then under road we added the general. So what you're supposed to say is this city takes care of its roads, and due to that, we are asking developers to pay their proportionate costs. You'll see that language in both the road and the rec part, where we're saying this city maintains its roads, it expands its roads as needed. This city maintains its parks, it expands its parks as needed. And due to that, we expect developers to pay their share. And then the other one is simply we needed to clarify that a separate fund needs to be established. Road and rec fees should be similar to the piggy bank. It should be a fund that would build up for a device, such as what if a road recreation impact fee builds up to a level where we know we have $50,000 to be a competitive match for a funding application to build new pickleball courts in Kiwanis. We know that that is residential based. They'll be used by our residents, future and fast. So that's part of what we're doing. We're going to clarify that in our own budgeting, our own accounting system, and then it simply ends with you also must have an appeal section. So that is the minimum requirement. As we work towards the methodology, we'll already have in place the way 1307 should be read. So with that, I'm just asking for a first reading. I gave you your options, but I really think this is the best. I'm not bypassing law and ordinance. I just don't think that this is in their gamut, because quite frankly, I'm trying to draw the line in the sand and get this corrected.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for Mr. Kennedy? Yes, Mr. Peng.
Just a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned the possibility of a police impact fee. Is there some reason why we wouldn't also do a fire impact fee?
Because it's a little bit more difficult just because they are based on levies. My argument for a police impact fee would be it's a pure general fund expense. You could argue that the taxpayers of XYZ subdivision or the Oak project would be paying that through the fee and levy, but yes, you certainly could. You certainly could. Police impact fees are very common, and when I looked at each of the communities and then went into their budgets, I realized those that don't even have, some of those have police impact fees and do have police levies. We have no police levy.
The other question I had was with regard to, if I'm reading this correctly, back in the 90s, the impact fee was set, and by 2000, it had risen to $500. So it's been $500 for the last 23 years.
Yes.
Is there some way to build into the impact fees some sort of inflationary aspect to make sure that we don't end up going 20 years before we increase it again? And it seems like that would be reasonable, that if you set the right price today and you adjust it for an inflationary aspect tied to some government standard, that then those fees could go up each year without having to revisit this. Is that a possibility? Or
yes, because you sent me that email and I looked at some, not so much in Ohio. I saw a couple in Indiana that have an inflation factor because everything is getting more expensive. And it's just got to be built into the methodology that Corey and I will be working on.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Blair?
Just a quick question, following up on Mr. Ping's observations. Do you have an idea if level setting to the 21st century from the mid-90s, do you have any idea, or would it be inappropriate to even discuss what a current level would be?
I'm from what I'm seeing from communities our size in the Dayton and Columbus area, where impact fees are fairly common. Many people are closer to $300 to $400 per bedroom. That's pretty common. Our 0.5% for a commercial, I think it needs to be modified so we're capturing significant modifications, what we call substantial improvements. because if you're coming in and you're buying a shell, the AMP building in the Commerce Park, and you will be exempt from paying an impact fee because you're not expanding the footprint of the building, but you're gutting the inside of that building, thereby spending a greater than 50% of the value of the structure, I think you should be subject to our impact fees. You are certainly going to be impacting what Chief Gabrielson does every day. And I think that's another thing I have in my head is that we're going to change that. I think 0.5% seems proper. 5% cap doesn't necessarily seem proper compared to other communities, but certainly there's a way around it, because think about every building in the Commerce Park. How many of those in our lifetime are going to be torn down to the ground and rebuilt? Not much. It's going to be Chestnut and then a lot of nothing.
Well,
So-
it just seems to me. I mean, if the fees were set in the '90s, this is a vastly
Certainly.
different city now that anybody would moving here would be a part of.
Right. And
Okay.
And I just want to add that, and I put it in my memo, Nisbet is a regional park, but we certainly aren't asking Sims and Miami Township to send us money to keep up those parks, just like we saw as far as what you did tonight on Corey's Bridge project. We are responsible for the fact that we are building a large regional park in our downtown district. When that's done, that will be a park like nothing else along the bike trail, my personal opinion. And you're looking at a $3 million fee. We're chasing every grant dollar there is, but developers need to pay their share. And I just use the pickleballs because, my goodness, our residents live pickleballs. Why wouldn't the future residents of Oak or any other version want pickleball courts? Well, to help pay for it. So,
Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Bateman.
Just a question about the appeal process. Is it the Planning and Zoning Commission that is going to be seeing potential appeals from developers on impact fees?
yeah, I looked at my options. I don't like putting people in front of you guys. I didn't think the Board of Zoning Appeals was right. I felt that the city manager isn't right. I thought most of those developers will have been in front of the Planning Commission for site plan review. So by matter of elimination, I ended up with P&Z. I don't think there would be a lot of appeals. I don't like putting people in front of you guys. Some communities do that. It just doesn't feel right. I'm not trying to protect you. It just really doesn't feel right.
No,
So-
that makes sense to me. I just was just trying to imagine how that would go throughout the process of a project.
Yeah.
When that might come up. The other question I have is just regarding the proposals that you and the team plan to present to us in the summer. How would that end up being? Would just be simply referred to in this ordinance, make an amendment to
Yeah,
it?
1307 would get modified. The dollar amounts of 1307 would get modified. 1307 is one of the only fees the city has that's not a part of Chapter 111. And I think there's a reason why. Because it has to be spelled out different. It's not like a zoning permit for a fence is this. A zoning, it's very unique. And that's why that language needed to be cleaned up.
So that it can go in there.
It'll go in there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, let's do the first reading of the ordinance, please.
Ordinance amending Chapter 1307 of the Loveland Code of Ordinances, Road and Recreation Capital Improvement Impact Fees.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
At Chapter 554, which is the outdoor lighting district regulations. And before I go into this, I'd just like to thank Vice Mayor Phelps and Law and Ordinance, and also Ms. Kessler, who has joined us this evening, for all of their work collectively to get us to this point. It really starting with nothing and then coming up with a set of regulations that I think is going to have a positive impact on the city. So, in an effort to improve the city's lighting standards, it was brought to our attention through Ms. Kessler's, passion for this, and then that we should talk to a gentleman by the name of Bob Parks, who is the executive director for SOLA, which is a Smart Outdoor Lighting Association, to look at model ordinances and to try and implement that. And so, before I go any further, from the onset of that, the entire goal of this was to regulate commercial properties and to have no impact on Mr. Homeowner that wants to change his fixtures and is not having to get a booklet out in Lowe's to decipher, fixtures and standards and bug ratings. So with that though, the other part of that is commercial properties will have the greatest positive impact because of the quantity and intensity of lighting that is usually associated with those installations. So, long story short, we started last year. We introduced it to law and ordinance in November, and then we worked through the following months, really culminating in March at the end of March with the final review of that, and they put forward a recommendation for City Council to adopt the ordinance as presented. So, the ordinance itself, it talks about commercial wall lights, signage lights, talks about stadium lighting. It talks about like the pole mounted lights, up lights, down lights, kind of using the model of bug rating. We got into a little bit about that with the discussion about the city street lights on the bridge here, West Loveland Bridge, about putting our best foot forward. You're looking for fixtures that don't result in backlight, uplight pollution, and they're the low glare fixtures. So the regulations do that. There are a couple of provisions in there that I call them good neighbor provisions. Specifically, the city doesn't really have any teeth right now to address if someone wants to shine a noxious light into somebody else's window. This would give us the teeth to say, hey, don't be a jerk to your neighbor. Don't do this. Don't create unlivable conditions for others. Short of that, you're talking about, municipal street lighting districts and commercial installations. The regulations are fairly comprehensive. I think they're going to do what we want them to do. The important thing to remember is it's sort of a slow burn in that, and it's incremental change because it's on a project by project basis. And the regulations include sunset provisions, a significant period of time, 10 years, which is actually more than the half-life of most new fixtures that somebody would install today. And it allows for normal maintenance and nonconformity preservation in that. Really hats off to Law and Ordinance. Law and Ordinance really went through this with a fine-tooth comb, talked about policy, talked about, how to regulate that, how to craft those regulations in a manner that ends up with the result that we want. I think, with all due respect, I think that I was thrilled to be part of that process. So with that, this is a staff report recommending that council schedule a public hearing and to be consistent, because again, we're talking about land use, to be consistent. And it's a pretty significant chapter. The council takes some time to review it before a public hearing. So we're recommending that council move to set a public hearing date, I say on or before May 9th. So May 9th would really give council approximately a little less than 30 days to review the ordinance and to dive into that. So with that, we will also, assuming council sets a public hearing, we'll publish the draft regulations on our website, and we'll put them out, on social media and those kind of things, directing people to review. So that concludes.
Thank you. Anybody have any comments or questions? Mr. Hart?
Quickly, the grandfathering of fixtures. Could you kind of go back over that again and say
Yes. So for commercial installations, there's existing fixtures are grandfathered, and then there's a 10-year compliance period, which allows after 10 years they have to be. And the reason we did that is because the half-life of most fixtures is you're beyond the useful life of that. And then for institutional, and we had an extensive, robust conversation on that. Institutional users, I don't believe there's any sunset clauses, we would call it. So they're just grandfathered until they change that. So that's important because, quasi institutional nonprofits, those kind of uses, a little bit sometimes more funding, challenged in that. And that provides them with some additional relief, not imposing an undue hardship. There's an extensive appeals process in there too for it's 3 steps: city manager, planning and zoning commission, board of lighting appeals, which is also the BZA, and then obviously they have the right to appeal to court if they're not pleased with that on exemptions. There's also a variance process in there too, which we felt was very important. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, did you want to add anything? Because this was major time spent in law and ordinance.
Yeah, thank you. I think we were, as a committee, convinced of the merits of doing this, as other communities have done, to get a handle on this, because the technology has changed. You now have LED lighting that's really cheap, but it also can be really ugly. And a great example is on page 246 of your packet. We've all seen the storefronts that can bear some of those lights that are unbearable to look at, and I think end up, neighboring businesses complain because there's a lot of glare that comes from them, and they're just not attractive at all. So there's an aesthetic portion to this, but there's also a safety element to what we're doing here, because these, not just LED lights, but any misdirected light, incandescent light, you name it, can affect the ability to see by motorists, to see pedestrians. And again, the technology and the study that's been done on this in the last 20 or 30 years is pretty revealing in terms of coming up with some agreed standards that are being adopted not only on an industry level, but in communities around the country. And so we took a hard look at these things, and through the help of Cindy and others, we I think came up with a reasonable regulation regime. I mean, I'm conservative enough to always have some apprehension with imposing more regulation on residents of the city, but again, we're starting off and may go no further in terms of the regulation. This is on commercial and institutional operations, not on residents. The city's not bound by it either, although we want to be a good neighbor, and we just passed something in terms of the bridge lights that what we're purchasing will be more dark sky in that direction than a noxious light direction. So, I learned a lot, and I think the committee worked hard to make something that's going to be reasonable and workable.
Thank you. Any further? Yes.
First off, I want to follow Mr. Wright and commend Vice Mayor Phelps and the Law and Ordinance Committee for their collaboration and compromise. And I want to express my great appreciation for Ms. Kessler for her indefatigable and missionary zeal that got us to this point. I'd also like to suggest that the CIC work to propose a plan, to Mr. Phelps's point, to bring to City Council that will, similar to the cost-sharing partnerships we did in the Heights, provide a grant process for homeowners to retrofit their out-of-date lighting. I imagine there are all kinds of, maybe not all kinds, but a fair amount of state and federal grants that the CIC could apply for to help help facilitate such an effort, and we kind of get a win-win for everybody. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? We do have a request to set a public hearing for May 9th, correct?
I'll move to set a public hearing on May 9th at or about 7 p.m. to consider the adoption of the proposed Chapter 554 outdoor lighting regulations as have been promulgated and recommended for adoption by the Law and Ordinance Committee.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
Mr. Ori?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps?
Yes.
Mr. Ping?
Yes.
Mayor Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right, I would just echo thanks to Mr. Wright and Law and Ordinance, and certainly you, Mrs. Kessler. This is yet another something that you've brought forward, and here we go. So thank you. All right, there are some building and zoning reports, mayor's court reports, and planning and zoning meeting minutes. Any comments on any of those? If not, the last matter is a memo from me to make a Civil Service Commission appointment. We have a resignation, and I recommend that Donna Jenkins be appointed to the Civil Service Commission. As you can see on the memo, she's well qualified for this. I'm seeking a motion to affirm Donna Jenkins' appointment to the partial term of the Civil Service Commission expiring on December 31st, 2023.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Ori?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Phelps?
Yes.
Mr. Ping?
Yes.
Mayor Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Mr. Hart.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right, just in way of announcements, it seems a very long time ago, but it was just last Wednesday, I think. Was it 2 Wednesdays ago? 2 Wednesdays ago. Claremont Chamber of Commerce once a year holds what they call their Salute to Leaders Awards, and each township in Claremont County and Milford and the city of Loveland get to choose somebody who is a recipient of that. This year in attendance were Mr. Wright, council members Ping, Blair. Who else was there? Bateman and Ori. Also, city manager Dave Kennedy and our police chief were there. Did I leave anybody out? And myself. And we saluted Pat Furter. This is the year of Pat Furter. So she was quite touched. There were lots of awards that were given, and we're a bit biased, but it was a show-stopping when she won her award. She was clearly well qualified for that.
And very moved.
Well received, yes, and very moved by it. Upcoming events, local income tax deadline is April 18th. Loveland's Tree and Environment Committee's annual litter pickup is Saturday, April 22nd from 9 to noon. Volunteers should meet at the gazebo. That's new. We can meet at the gazebo now. How about that? At 9 a.m. on April 22nd. On April 24th, Tri-Health's mobile mammography bus will be in downtown Loveland from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Appointments can be made on the city's website, lovelandoh.gov, and every other community event is listed at loveandlifeloveland.com. Does anybody else have any other announcements?
I do quickly, if I may.
Yes.
On Monday, the 8th of April in 2024, between 3:10 and 3:15 in the afternoon, we have. I encourage everybody who has never been there to find some place between Dayton and Toledo to see the most awesome, exciting, and in some ways disturbing and even terrifying celestial event you'll ever see, and that is a total solar eclipse.
Do you mean?
I was at the one.
Did he say 2024?
2024.
So a year from now.
Make your plans now. I was at the one in 2017, and believe me, you better have planned where you're going to be, because getting out of there, wherever it is, will be a nightmare.
Woodstock.
Okay.
It's worse than Woodstock. But anyway, it's if you've never seen a total eclipse, it is magical. It's staggering the first time you see it. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's anywhere between Dayton and Toledo. Go find out somewhere in the country. And make sure you got a route back, because it's going to be a booger.
Okay. Any other announcements? All right. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Phelps?
Yes.
Mr. Ping?
Yes.
Mayor Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Bateman?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
Mr. Ori?
Yes.